Welcome back to the Midnight Tapes. Get comfortable. Turn the lights down low, pull the blanket up, and let the rain settle in around you. Let it tap softly against the glass. Let it blur the edges of the room. Let it make the world outside seem farther away than it really is. And if this is the 12th tape you have fallen asleep to with me, thank you. Truly. It means more than you know that you have let me keep you company through these dark hours, that you have let my voice sit beside the rain while you drifted somewhere quiet. Tonight, all 8 stories come from abandoned places. The empty buildings we leave behind. The closed hospitals at the edge of town. The dead factories with broken windows and rusted gates. The ghost towns sitting in the desert sun. The shuttered malls where the fountains have gone dry and the escalators no longer move. The schools with dust on the blackboards. The amusement parks with their rides locked in place beneath the moon. We like to think these places are simply empty. Vacant. Finished. We imagine that when people walk away from a building, the building becomes nothing more than walls and floors and old wiring, a shell waiting for demolition, or weather or time. But anyone who has stood inside a truly abandoned place after dark will tell you the truth. Empty is not the same as unoccupied. People leave, yes. They leave their apartments and offices, their shops and classrooms, their wards and workstations. They take what they can carry, and they forget what they cannot. They move to other towns. They grow old. They die. Their names come off the mailboxes. Their voices stop echoing in the halls. But something stays. A place where people live does not forget immediately. A building has patience. It holds the shape of footsteps long after the feet are gone. It keeps the warmth of a hand on a railing, the weight of sorrow in a bedroom, the laughter that once rose in a food court, the tired silence of men clocking in before dawn, the fear of patients waiting in clean white rooms, the joy of children riding bright machines beneath summer lights. Time does not clean a place all at once. It covers it slowly, in dust and rot and darkness. But under that dust, the old life can still be there, pressed into the rooms like a memory that refuses to fade. And sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, when the rain keeps everyone sensible indoors, when only the curious or the lonely or the foolish cross the broken threshold, those memories lift their heads. These stories came from people who went into abandoned places and found them not so empty after all. You do not have to stay awake for all of them. Let your eyes close whenever they want to. If you drift before the end, that is all right. The tape will keep playing softly in the dark. Your home is full and warm and lived in tonight. The rooms around you know your footsteps. The door is locked. The rain is only rain. The dark is just the dark. Just do not go exploring where the lights have gone out for good. Before the first story begins, take a moment with the idea of an abandoned place. Picture one now, not too sharply. A place you have passed without entering. A building behind a fence. A store with paper over the windows. A gas station with weeds growing through the pumps. A school with the playground removed. A house at the end of a street where the porch has sagged and the mailbox leans into grass. In the daytime, such places can look almost harmless. Sad, maybe. Ugly, maybe. They are background details, the kind of ruins we drive past on the way to somewhere still useful. But at night they become larger. The boarded windows turn black and reflective. The gaps in the walls seem intentional. The empty parking lots become fields of wet pavement. A single scrap of plastic moves in the wind and sounds like a footstep. A loose sign taps once, waits, taps again. The mind tries to help. It says these are only materials. Brick, tile, glass, steel. It says there is no one in the shuttered mall, no one in the old school, no one in the hospital whose halls have been stripped of beds. It says the lights are out because the power has been cut. It says the door is closed because the lock is rusted. It says the sound upstairs is an animal, or water, or the settling of old boards. The mind is often right. But not always. There is another truth, quieter and older, that people who work with buildings sometimes understand. Houses have moods. Hospitals have memories. Schools keep the sound of bells. Factories keep the rhythm of work. Theaters keep applause in the rafters. Churches hold whispers. And malls, those bright temples of ordinary wanting, keep the footsteps of everyone who ever came there with a little money and a little loneliness, looking for something to carry home. Maybe that is why abandoned places pull at us. We say we want to explore them because of history, or photography, or curiosity. But maybe what we really want is to stand where time has gone thin. To put one hand on a wall and feel the old life still humming faintly behind it. To prove that not everything disappears when people leave. The danger, of course, is that some places feel us touching back. Some empty rooms do not want witnesses. Some welcome them. And there is not always much difference between the two. Let us begin. The mall after closing. I worked night security at a shopping mall, one of those big enclosed malls that used to be the center of everything and then slowly became a monument to better years. If you are old enough, you remember what those places were like when they were alive. Bright skylights. Fountains throwing silver water into the air. Food courts full of noise and teenagers and families. Music playing from every store. Children begging to ride the little coin-operated animals near the entrance. People walking without any real purpose except to be somewhere warm and public and bright. By the time I started working there, that version of the mall was mostly gone. The fountain had been turned off years before to save money. Half the restaurants in the food court were dark, their signs still hanging above empty counters. Whole corridors had lost their tenants. The old department store anchors at the ends of the building were locked behind security gates, their display windows dressed with mannequins wearing clothes from seasons nobody remembered. Some storefronts still had faded sale signs in them, as if the staff had only stepped away for lunch and never come back. During the day, there was just enough life to pretend the place was still functioning. A few elderly walkers did laps before opening. A handful of stores held on. Parents came in on rainy Saturdays because there was nowhere else indoors to take the kids. But at night, after the last lights dimmed and the last employee door clicked shut, the truth of the place came out. It was enormous. Hollow. Echoing. My job was simple. I walked the corridors. I checked doors. I made sure no teenagers had slipped inside to vandalize the empty wings. I looked for leaks, alarms, broken locks, anything that needed to be called in. It was boring work most nights, and I did not mind that. Boring is good when you work alone in a dying mall at 2 in the morning. The first strange thing was the music. I was in the south wing, the deadest part of the building, where every storefront had been empty for at least 5 years. The lights there were kept low, just enough for cameras and patrols. The escalators had been switched off. The tile floors were dusty in the corners. You could hear your own breathing down there. Then, somewhere ahead of me, music started playing. Not loud. Not clear. Just the soft, tinny wash of pop music coming from overhead speakers that, as far as I knew, had not worked in that wing for years. It was the sort of upbeat music stores play so you do not notice how long you have been browsing. Cheery. Bland. A little too bright for the empty dark. I stopped walking. The music continued. I radioed the control desk, but there was no answer. That was not unusual. The other guard was probably in the camera room, half asleep. I kept moving, more annoyed than afraid, thinking maybe someone from maintenance had turned on a breaker, or some old system had glitched back to life. Then I saw light ahead. The south wing was not dark anymore. The old mall lights were on, not the dim security lights, but the warm overhead lights from better days. The storefronts were open. Not just lit. Open. The metal grates were up. Displays stood in the windows. Clothing racks were full. The old toy store had bright boxes stacked inside. The record shop that had closed before I was hired had posters in its windows and a spinning display by the entrance. And there were people. Shoppers. Dozens of them. They were strolling along the concourse, carrying bags, browsing windows, sitting on benches, leaning over the railing to look down at the lower level. A group of teenagers rode the escalator, laughing. A mother adjusted the hood on a child in a stroller. A man in a brown leather jacket stood outside the record shop reading the back of a cassette tape. Two women compared shoes in a storefront that had been empty concrete that morning. The sound hit me all at once. The footsteps. The murmurs. The rustle of shopping bags. The distant laughter. The music. The soft mechanical hum of a mall that should have been dead. I stood at the entrance to the wing with my flashlight in my hand, completely unable to move. At first, my brain tried to make it normal. It tried very hard. Some kind of film shoot. A private event. A charity thing. Maybe I had missed a memo, though that made no sense at 2 in the morning in a closed wing with no active power. Then I noticed their clothes. They were not costumes exactly. They were not ancient. Just wrong by a little. A little too old. A little out of date. The kind of clothes you would see in photographs from 10 or 15 years earlier. The hairstyles too. The shopping bags had logos from stores that no longer existed. One man carried a large glossy bag from the department store that had been sealed since before I got the job. They did not see me. Or they were pretending not to. They moved around me as if I were standing behind glass, as if I were looking into some preserved afternoon that belonged to the mall and not to the present. A busy Saturday, trapped inside the walls and replaying itself after closing. I should have backed away then. Instead, I took one step forward. The moment my shoe touched the brighter tile of the south wing, the air changed. It became warmer. Not by much, but enough. The stale cold of the abandoned corridor softened into the heated air of a crowded building. I smelled pretzels. Perfume. New plastic. Coffee from a kiosk that had been removed years before. A boy ran past me holding a paper cup of soda. He did not brush my coat, but I felt a moving cold where his shoulder should have touched me. That was when one of them noticed me. She was standing outside the old department store with 2 shopping bags hanging from her wrist. A woman in her 30s, maybe, with short dark hair and a red scarf. She had been looking into a window display when she slowly turned her head and looked directly at me. Not through me. At me. Her expression was not frightened. It was warm. Recognizing. Almost relieved. She smiled the way you smile when you see someone arrive late to a gathering and want them to know they are welcome. Then she lifted one hand and waved me over. "Come on," the gesture said. "There is still time. The shops are open." I did not move. Her smile stayed in place, but there was something behind it now. A pressure. A pull. It was not threatening. That was what made it worse. It was inviting. Gentle. Familiar. The whole wing seemed to lean toward me with her, all those lights and voices and open stores making a promise I had not known I wanted. Come in. Be warm. Be part of it. I heard myself whisper no. Then I backed up, one step, then another, until my heels crossed the line between the lit wing and the dark corridor behind me. The moment I did, the music thinned. The smell of pretzels vanished. The air went cold again. The woman in the red scarf lowered her hand. For a second her expression changed, not into anger, but into disappointment so deep it felt almost human. Then the lights flickered. I ran. I told the other guard I had felt sick and skipped that part of the patrol. He barely looked up from his phone. The next night I told myself I had been tired. The night after that, I was assigned the same route again. I did not want to go near the south wing. But something about that job makes you ashamed of fear. You are wearing a uniform. You have keys. A radio. A flashlight. You tell yourself you are the official presence in the building, that you belong there more than anything else does. At 2:15, I reached the south wing. The lights were on again. The stores were open again. The shoppers were back. This time I did not step forward. I stood in the dark and looked down the concourse from a safe distance. I saw the woman in the red scarf near the fountain. I saw the teenagers on the escalator. I saw a security guard walking slowly among them in a uniform like mine, though older, with a cap we no longer wore. He looked comfortable there. He chatted with a shopkeeper. He leaned on the railing. He belonged. The next day, I asked the daytime supervisor if any guards had died in the mall. He gave me a look and asked why I wanted to know. I shrugged and said I had found an old name carved into the desk in the security office. He told me about a man named Dennis, a guard from years back. Heart attack during the holiday season, right near the south wing, when the mall was still busy. He had loved the place, the supervisor said. Loved the job. Knew every tenant, every regular shopper, every kid who used to cause trouble. After he died, some of the old staff joked that if anybody would keep walking the mall after death, it would be Dennis. That night I looked again. The old guard in the south wing turned just enough for me to see his face. I had seen his photograph on the wall outside the break room, in a row of old employee pictures nobody dusted anymore. Dennis. He looked younger than the photograph. Healthier. Happy. He had a shopping bag in one hand, and when he saw me, he touched 2 fingers to the brim of his old cap, a friendly guard-to-guard greeting. Behind him, the woman in the red scarf smiled at me. I quit within the month. Not because anything chased me. Nothing ever did. That was not how the mall worked. It did not frighten you into staying. It welcomed you. It made the empty places bright. It opened the stores you remembered from childhood. It filled the corridors with people who seemed glad to see you. It offered you a version of the world where nothing had closed, nobody had left, the music still played, the food court was still full, and there was always somewhere to go on a rainy afternoon. That was the danger. The mall closed for good a year later. They boarded the entrances and sold the land. Last I heard, the building still stands because the redevelopment got tied up in lawsuits. Sometimes, when I drive past at night, I see no lights in the windows. Nothing but a dark shape behind chain-link fencing. But I never look for long. Because I know that somewhere inside, past the locked doors and dead cameras and shuttered shops, the south wing is open. The lights are warm. The escalators are moving. The crowd is larger than it used to be. And maybe Dennis is still making his patrol, nodding to the shoppers, keeping watch over a mall that never quite agreed to close, while the woman in the red scarf waits near the entrance and smiles at anyone who sees the lights and thinks, just for a second, that it might be nice to go in. There was one last thing. Something I did not tell the supervisor when I quit, because I knew how it would sound. On my final night, after I turned in my keys but before I walked out to my car, I looked back down the main concourse from the security office. The mall was dark in the places that were supposed to be dark. The living stores were locked. The kiosks were covered. The fountain was dry, as always. But in the reflection of the security office glass, the south wing was visible behind me. Not the real south wing. The reflection. In the reflection, it was bright. I could see shoppers passing, small and golden in the glass, moving behind my own reflected shoulder. I saw the woman in the red scarf standing very close to where my reflection stood. She did not wave this time. She was looking at the keys in my hand. Then Dennis appeared beside her. He looked at me, and for a moment I understood something. Maybe the mall did not take everyone. Maybe it kept the people who had already given too much of themselves to it. The old guards, the clerks who worked holiday seasons until their feet failed, the lonely shoppers who came every day because it was the only place bright enough to feel alive. Maybe the south wing was not hunting strangers at all. Maybe it was simply gathering the people who had belonged there more than they belonged anywhere else. That thought should have comforted me. It did not. Because belonging is a dangerous thing when a place wants you. I left my keys on the desk and walked out without looking behind me again. As I crossed the empty parking lot, I heard the automatic doors at the entrance slide open. They had been locked. I kept walking. A burst of warm air followed me into the rain, carrying the smell of cinnamon pretzels and floor cleaner and perfume and coffee. For one awful second, I almost turned around. I almost looked back into the bright entrance where I knew, somehow, people were standing just inside, not chasing, only waiting. The way friends wait when they are sure you will change your mind. I got into my car and drove away with both hands tied on the wheel. For months afterward, I could not go into malls. Not even living ones. The sound of escalators, the echo under high ceilings, the soft music from hidden speakers, all of it made me feel that if I looked down the wrong corridor I would see the south wing again, open and impossible, with Dennis making his rounds and the woman in the red scarf holding up one hand in patient welcome. I work in an office now. Day shift. Windows. People around. Still, there are winter evenings when I pass a closed store after hours and the glass reflects more movement than it should. A figure inside. A light behind the shutters. A hand lifting in greeting. I keep walking. Always. Because I learned that abandoned malls do not become empty. They become selective. They save the best version of themselves for the people who can still see it. And once you see it, it remembers your face. The rain is still falling. Stay with me. The next place is far from the city. The ghost towns welcome. I have always been drawn to ghost towns. Some people like mountains, some like beaches, some like museums. I like the abandoned settlements you find out in dry country, where the road thins to gravel and then dirt, where the wind moves through buildings whose names have fallen off the maps. Mining towns, mostly. Railway stops. Places built in a rush because there was gold, or silver, or work, or water, and then emptied just as quickly when the reason for being there ran out. I liked photographing them. That is what I told people, anyway. The truth is that I liked the feeling of them. The strange pause in the air. The sense that you had arrived after the story ended, but before the stage had been cleared. I liked walking through a doorway and seeing wallpaper curling from the walls, a rusted stove, a bed frame, a few bottles on a shelf. I liked imagining the person who had last closed that door, last looked through that window, last stepped into the street thinking they would return. Most ghost towns are sad. This one was not. I found it on an old map, far out in high desert country, down a road that was barely a road by the time I reached it. The town had a name, but I will not say it. It had been abandoned for decades, according to every record I could find. A small mining settlement, emptied after the mine failed and the railroad stopped caring. The drive took most of the afternoon. By the time I saw the first roofs, the sun was low and red, making the desert look like the surface of another planet. I expected ruins, sagging structures, roofs fallen in, the usual. Instead, the town looked kept. Not new, not restored for tourists. There were no signs, no visitor center, no plaques, no bathrooms, no parking lot. But the buildings were standing. Straight. Whole. The windows had glass. Curtains hung inside them. The general store had goods arranged behind the front window. The saloon doors moved lightly in the wind, as if someone had just passed through. A water trough stood in the street with a skin of dust across it, but the wood was not rotted. The church bell tower leaned only a little. I stopped my car in the middle of the main street and turned off the engine. The silence came down immediately. I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel and felt, with sudden certainty, that I was being watched. That is common in abandoned places. Your mind fills empty windows with faces. It is an old survival instinct. Usually, after a minute, the feeling fades. This did not fade. It grew. The town felt aware. Not haunted in the dramatic way. No cold breeze. No whispered name. It was more like arriving late to a dinner where everyone has already taken their seats. You step into the room, and conversation stops, and every face turns toward you. Not hostile. Not surprised. Expectant. I got out of the car. The gravel sounded too loud under my boots. The town held itself very still. The sun touched the windows and filled them with red light, and for a moment every building seemed to have an eye. Then I saw the first resident. A woman stood behind the glass of the general store. She was not clear at first. More an arrangement of darkness and pale shape, a figure where no figure should be. She stood motionless, looking out at me from inside the store. I raised my camera by instinct, but the moment I did, she was gone. I lowered it. A man was on the saloon porch. He leaned against a post, hat low, one foot crossed over the other, the way a man might stand on a hot evening watching a stranger arrive. He was too far away to see well, but I knew he was looking at me. Then, from the upstairs window of the boarding house, 2 children appeared. They pressed their hands to the glass. More figures came as I walked. A face in a kitchen window. A man in a doorway. A woman seated in a rocking chair on a porch, though I could not remember a rocking chair being there when I drove in. They did not speak. They did not approach. They only watched. And they felt happy. That was the word I could not escape. Happy. Not hungry. Not angry. Not trapped in torment. They were glad. Glad in a way that was almost painful to feel, as if the whole town had been waiting years and years for someone to come down that road, and now I had, and it could barely contain its welcome. I should have left then. But the sun was dropping, and the town was beautiful in that last light. My camera felt heavy around my neck, and curiosity is a leash that pulls harder than fear, at least at first. I told myself I would walk once around the main street, take a few photographs, and leave before dark. The general store door was open. I had seen it close from the car. I am sure of that. Now it stood slightly ajar, and from inside came the smell of coffee and dust and old wood. Not the stale smell of abandonment. the living smell of a place in use. I pushed the door gently. A bell above it rang. That little sound nearly broke me. It was so ordinary, so cheerful, so exactly the sound a bell should make over the door of a small-town store that for half a second I expected a clerk to call from the back, "Be right with you." Nobody called. The shelves were stocked with canned goods, flour sacks, tobacco tins, jars of candy. Everything looked slightly faded, but not rotten. A ledger lay open on the counter. There was fresh ink in the pen beside it. My name was written on the page. Not my full name. Just my first name, in neat black handwriting. Below it, a line had been drawn, waiting for something else to be added. I backed away from the counter. Behind me, the bell rang again. I turned. The woman I had seen in the window stood inside the door now. She wore a long dress the color of dust and lilacs. Her face was pale, soft, kind. She smiled with such open relief that I felt ashamed for being afraid of her. She did not speak. She lifted one hand and gestured toward the shelves, toward the room, toward the town beyond the window. "Welcome," the gesture said. "We are so glad you came." I left the store without running. I think if I had run, the town would have changed. I sensed that somehow. I walked calmly back into the street, though my pulse hammered so hard I could hear it. The street was full now. People stood on porches, at windows, in doorways. A man came out of the blacksmith's shop wiping his hands on a cloth. A little girl sat on the steps of the church swinging her feet. The saloon doors opened, and from inside came the sound of voices and glasses and a piano playing one slow, cheerful song. They watched me pass with warm, welcoming eyes. It was terrible because it was not terrible. The town wanted me to feel safe. It wanted me to feel wanted. And I did. That is the part one do not like to admit. A loneliness I had not known I was carrying rose in me like thirst. I had been traveling alone for weeks. I had no one waiting at home, no appointment I could not miss, no one who would worry before morning if I failed to check in. And here was a whole town turned toward me with joy. There were empty houses. I noticed that as I walked. Not all the houses were occupied. Some stood dark, but clean and ready. Curtains in the windows. Beds visible through open doors. Chairs waiting on porches. A vacancy here, a vacancy there. Not many. Just enough. One house had a lamp burning in the front room. It was small, white, with blue trim and a sagging porch. On the porch rail hung a coat that looked about my size. I stopped in front of it. The town grew very quiet. Every resident watched. The door of the little house opened inward. Warm lamplight spilled over the threshold. From somewhere behind me, a child laughed softly, delighted, as if I had finally understood the game. I stepped toward the house. Only one step. But in that step I saw my life there, or something like a life. Morning light through those windows. Coffee from the general store. Work that did not matter but felt meaningful. Evenings in the saloon. Neighbors who knew my name. A place that needed me because it had made a space exactly my shape and had waited so patiently for me to fill it. Then my phone alarm went off in my pocket. It was stupid. A reminder I had set hours earlier to take medication. A bright electronic chirp from the modern world, absurdly loud in the old street. The spell cracked. The lamplight became too yellow. The smiles became too still. The waiting empty house became, for 1 second, a mouth. I ran. The town did change then. Not into rage. Into grief. As I sprinted from my car, The residents leaned from windows and doorways with faces twisted in disappointment so profound it felt like betrayal. The woman from the store stood in the street with both hands clasped at her chest. The man on the saloon porch took off his hat. The children at the boarding house window began to cry, silently, their mouths open and no sound coming out. My car engine coughed twice before it started. In the rearview mirror, the whole town had gathered in the street. They did not chase me. They only watched me leave. At the edge of town, where the dirt road bent away into desert, I looked back once. The main street glowed warmly in the dusk. Every building was lit now. Smoke rose from chimneys that had not stood warm for decades. People moved from porch to porch, comforting one another after my departure. I have never gone back. But I dream about it. In the dreams, I drive that road again, and the town is there, patient and repaired, and the residents come to the windows, and the little white house with blue trim opens its door. Sometimes I go in. Sometimes I hang my coat on the porch rail. Sometimes I sign the ledger in the general store, not under visitor, but under resident. And sometimes, on nights when I feel very alone, I wake up missing a place I barely escaped. That is how ghost towns get you, I think. Not with fear. Not with chains or screams or bones in the dust. They welcome you. They make room. They show you the vacancy that has always been waiting. And if you are lonely enough, tired enough, or foolish enough, you step into the warm open house, and the town is not abandoned anymore. It has one more resident. Months after I escaped, I tried to convince myself the experience had been heat, exhaustion, loneliness, suggestion. I even searched online for photographs of the town, hoping to find some obvious explanation. Maybe a living history group maintained it. Maybe a film crew had used it. Maybe there was a caretaker. There were almost no photographs. The few I found looked nothing like what I had seen. In them, the town was collapsed. Roofs gone. The general storefront caved in. The saloon nothing but posts and a partial wall. The little white house with blue trim did not appear in any image. According to the records, it had burned in 1911. I stopped searching after I found the newspaper clipping. It was from the year the town was finally abandoned. A short article in an old scanned archive, barely readable. It said a traveler had gone missing on the road between two towns. His wagon was found empty near the settlement. No trace of him was discovered, but residents insisted he had arrived safely and chosen to stay. Residents. That word made my mouth go dry. Because the article was dated 5 years after the mine closed, 3 years after the post office was discontinued, and at least a year after official records said the town had no population. Still, the article quoted residents. People in the town, apparently, telling a reporter that the missing man had not vanished. He had come home. He had taken the room above the general store and was happy there. I wondered how many names had appeared in the ledger before mine. How many visitors had found a town repaired just for them, a porch light left on, a coat in their size, a community ready to love them as long as they never asked why nobody aged, or where the road went after dark, or why the cemetery behind the church had no fresh graves despite the endless years of residence. Sometimes, when I travel through desert country, I feel the pull before I see anything. A warmth under the ribs. A sudden wish to turn down an unmarked road. It is never strong, not at first. Just a thought. Maybe there is something out there. Maybe I should look. Maybe I am closer than I think. I do not take those roads anymore. The town is patient. That is what scares me. It does not need to chase. It does not need to haunt your house or shout your name through the radio. It only needs to remain where it is, repaired and waiting, while the world makes you lonelier year by year. One day, perhaps, if I am old enough and tired enough and have lost enough people, the memory of that little white house will feel less like a warning and more like mercy. That is why I keep telling the story. To remind myself how the door looked. Not open like a home. Open like a mouth. You are doing fine. Let your eyes rest. The next tape is already playing. The school at night. When I was a teenager, there was an old school in our town that had been closed for years. It was a big brick building on a hill, built in the 1920s, with tall windows and wide front steps and a bell tower that no longer had a bell. Everyone had some story about it. Our parents had gone there. Some of our grandparents had gone there. Then a new school was built across town, bright and modern and ugly, and the old one was shut down. For a while, there was talk of turning it into apartments or offices or a community center. None of that happened. The building sat empty. The grass grew tall. Windows broke. Plywood went up and came down and went up again. To us, it was irresistible. We were 16, maybe 17. Old enough to know better, young enough not to care. There were 4 of us that night, and every one of us pretended not to be scared as we crossed the overgrown yard with cheap flashlights and a backpack full of snacks. We had told each other we were going to take pictures, write our names on the roof, maybe find old yearbooks or trophies. Mostly, we wanted the story of having gone inside. We got in through a broken basement window behind the cafeteria. The first thing I remember is the smell. Dust, wet wood, mold, old paper. The smell of a building that had been shut up too long and had started breathing inward. Our flashlights made narrow tunnels in the dark. We climbed the basement stairs and came out into a hallway lined with lockers, most of them hanging open like mouths. It was thrilling at first. We whispered even though there was no one to hear us. We opened classroom doors. We found desks stacked against walls, faded posters, a globe with the Soviet Union still on it, a teacher's lounge with a couch that had collapsed in the middle. Someone had spray-painted a crude symbol over the office door. Rainwater dripped somewhere steadily, though it was not raining outside. Then we heard the class. It came from the second floor. A teacher's voice. Not loud. Not clear enough to make out every word at first. But unmistakable. The steady rhythm of a lesson. A pause. The scrape of chalk. The murmur of students. A cough. The soft squeak of chair legs on tile. We all stopped in the hallway. Nobody spoke. The sound continued above us. One of my friends whispered that maybe other kids were inside. Maybe they were messing with us. Another whispered that no kid could make a chalkboard sound that real. I remember my flashlight trembling a little in my hand, the beam quivering against the lockers. We should have left. Instead, we went upstairs. The old staircase creaked under us. The sound of the lesson grew clearer with each step. By the time we reached the second floor hall, we could hear individual words, though not enough to understand the subject. The teacher was explaining something patiently. There was chalk on slate, then the rustle of children writing. The light was coming from room 204. Every other classroom was dark. Under the door of 204 lay a thin bar of warm yellow light. We approached slowly, shoulder to shoulder, our flashlights pointed at the floor as if the beams might offend whatever was inside. The little rectangular window in the classroom door was dusty, but not blocked. We looked in. The classroom was full. Children sat in rows at old wooden desks. A teacher stood at the blackboard, her back to us, writing in neat chalk letters. The room looked not new exactly, but active. Clean. organized. The map was pulled down. Papers were stacked on the teacher's desk. Coats hung on hooks near the door. Every desk was occupied except for a few in the back. For 3 or 4 seconds, my mind accepted it. It saw class. Then it began to reject the details. The children were gray. Not like stone. Like old photographs. Faded, washed out, the color drained from them and from their clothes. Their outlines were soft. The desks behind them showed faintly through their shoulders when they moved. The teacher's dress was an old style, the kind you see in yearbook photos from decades before. Her hair was pinned up. Her hand moved across the board, but the chalk made no marks I could read. The lesson continued. Not one child turned around. I realized then that we were not watching ghosts in the way movies showed them. We were watching a day. A school day that had happened, maybe 1,000 times, somehow still happening in room 204. A lesson that had not ended. A building remembering what it had been built to hold. One of my friends whispered, "Oh my God." The teacher stopped writing. The chalk paused against the board. The entire room went quiet. Then, slowly, the teacher turned. She was not frightening at first. That may have been the worst thing. She had a kind face. Tired, maybe, but kind. The kind of teacher who would notice when a child came to school hungry and quietly bring extra crackers. Her eyes rested on the little window in the door, on our faces pressed there in the dark. She smiled. Then she said, in a voice that came clearly through the door, warm and welcoming and terrible, "Ah, new students." Every child in the room turned to look at us. All at once. Their faded faces were eager. Curious. Some of them smiled. Some looked relieved, as if they had been waiting a very long time for more children to arrive. The teacher set the chalk down. "Come in," she said. "There are plenty of empty desks." The empty desks in the back seemed to shift in the dim room. I know that sounds impossible, but it is what I saw. They seemed to slide apart slightly, making room. Not for all 4 of us, maybe. Or perhaps for exactly all 4 of us. Their wooden seats gleamed in the warm classroom light. On each one, a clean sheet of paper appeared. A pencil rolled gently to the edge of the nearest desk and stopped. My friend touched the doorknob. I grabbed his wrist. He looked at me with a blank expression, not scared anymore. Calm. Almost sleepy. Later, he said he heard a bell. He said he thought class was starting and that we were late. He said the room smelled like pencil shavings and floor wax, and he felt suddenly ashamed, the way you feel when you walk into a classroom after everyone is already seated and the teacher is waiting. I pulled him back hard. The teacher's smile thinned. Not vanished. Not turned angry. Thinned. "Do not be late," she said softly. Then the bell rang. Not from the broken tower outside. Not from anywhere in the building we could see. It rang through the hallway, loud and pure and old, a school bell calling students to class. We ran. The hall seemed longer on the way back. Doors we had passed open were closed now. Lockers slammed behind us, one after another, like children clapping. From inside room 204 came the scrape of desks moving, chair legs dragging as students stood. I heard the teacher say, "Line up quietly." That was when one of my friends screamed. Not because something touched him, he said later. Because he heard footsteps behind us. Small ones? Many of them. We tore down the stairs, across the first floor hall, into the basement, and out through the broken window one by one, skinning elbows and tearing clothes. We did not stop running until we were 2 blocks away under a street lamp, bent over, gasping, covered in dust and fear. None of us spoke for a long time. Then the friend whose wrist I had grabbed opened his hand. There was a yellow pencil in it. He did not remember picking it up. On the side, printed in tiny black letters, was the name of the old school. We threw it into a storm drain and swore never to go back. The next day, in daylight, I told myself it had been a prank. Someone had set it up. The pencil was old because the building was old. The sounds were other kids, recordings, something. But there were problems with every explanation. The town was small. Nobody bragged. Nobody posted photographs. Nobody knew we had gone. Years later, the school was torn down. I watched from across the street when the machines came. It felt wrong, like watching an animal put to sleep. The first wall came down in a cloud of brick dust. Rooms opened to the sky, exposed for the first time in nearly a century. I looked for room 204. When the excavator reached the second floor, it paused. Not because of anything supernatural. Probably because the operator needed to reposition. But in that pause, as the broken classroom hung open above the rubble, I thought I heard children reciting something in unison. Then the wall collapsed. The sound stopped. They built townhouses on the site. Nice ones. Expensive. Families live there now. Children ride bicycles on the sidewalk where the front steps used to be. Sometimes I wonder if the class moved on when the building fell. Sometimes I hope it did. But once, a few years after the demolition, I drove past the townhouses at night. One upstairs window was lit. Behind the curtain, for just a moment, I saw the shadow of a woman standing at a board, arm raised, writing. And from somewhere, muffled by the rain and the dark, I heard a bell ring. One of the four of us kept the secret worse than the rest. His name was Aaron. He was the friend whose hand I had pulled off the doorknob. After that night, he changed in ways we noticed but did not understand. He stopped joking about the school. He stopped coming out late. He started carrying notebooks everywhere, the cheap spiral kind, and he filled them with neat handwriting none of us were allowed to read. At graduation, years later, he gave me one page. He said he did not want it in his house anymore. The page was covered with lines, written again and again in perfect old-fashioned script. I will not be late. I will not be late. I will not be late. Across the bottom, in handwriting that was not his, someone had written, "Very good. Please return this for credit." Aaron said he dreamed of room 204 every September. In the dream, he sat in the back row. The teacher took attendance. When she reached his name, she smiled. Not angrily. Patiently. Then she marked him absent in her red book, and said they would keep his desk ready. He became a teacher eventually. That detail feels too neat, but it is true. Elementary school. He was good at it, by all accounts. Gentle, patient, beloved by children. He told me once that he thought teaching was the only way to quiet the dreams. If he stood at the front of a real classroom, in daylight, with living children in front of him, the other classroom felt farther away. It worked for a while. Then, during his 5th year teaching, he called me in the middle of the night. He did not say hello. He said, "They found me." I asked what he meant. He told me he had stayed late at his school grading papers. A modern building, nothing like the old brick one. Around 9, he heard a bell ring in the hallway. Not the electronic tone his school used. A real bell. Brass. Old. Then he heard children reciting from a room that should have been empty. He went to look. Of course he did. Some part of him had been walking toward that sound since we were teenagers. At the end of the hall, where the computer lab should have been, he found a wooden door with a little rectangular window. Light underneath. Chalk on slate. A woman's voice saying, "Class, we have a returning student." He hung up after that. I drove to his apartment, and found him sitting on the floor with every light on, his notebooks piled around him. He did not disappear. Not then. But he resigned from teaching by the end of the month. The old school is gone, but I no longer think the class needed the building. Maybe the building was only where we first heard it. Maybe some lessons are older than walls. Maybe a classroom can keep a desk for you anywhere, once your name has been called. Aaron moved away. We lost touch. The last I heard, he worked in a warehouse, night shifts, far from children and blackboards. I hope he sleeps well. I hope none of his dreams begin with a bell. If your eyes are closed now, let them stay closed. You do not need to see for this one. The factory whistle. The town I grew up in was built around a factory. That is not a figure of speech. The factory came first, or close enough. It sat at the edge of the river, long and black and brick, with smokestacks that made the skyline and a chain-link fence that seemed to go on forever. Houses grew around it because workers needed somewhere close to live. Stores opened because those workers needed bread, cigarettes, boots, lunches packed at dawn. The school mascot was named after the factory. The high school yearbook always had pages of boys and girls whose fathers and mothers worked there. People measured time by the whistle. 7 in the morning, noon, 3:30, 11 at night. The whistle told the town when to wake, when to eat, when shifts began and ended, when fathers would come home smelling of oil and metal and heat. My grandfather worked there. My father worked there for a while. My uncle worked there until it closed. By the time I was old enough to remember, the factory was already dead. The company had moved operations overseas. That was the phrase everyone used, as if a thing as enormous as that factory could simply move somewhere else. In reality, it shut down. The machines were sold or left to rust. The gates were locked. The men and women who had given their backs and hands and hearing to that place were sent home with boxes, checks, and no clear idea what to do with the rest of their lives. The town never recovered. Some people found other work. Some moved. Some drank. Some sat on porches for years looking toward the factory, as if waiting for someone to admit it had all been a mistake. My uncle was one of those. He had started at the factory at 18 and had never imagined leaving it except by retirement or death. He was not a sentimental man. He did not talk about feelings. But after the factory closed, something in him went loose. He fixed things nobody asked him to fix. He woke before dawn and dressed as if for work, then sat at the kitchen table until my aunt cried. He kept his lunch pail by the back door for months. And every night, at 11, the whistle blew. It should not have. The factory had no power. The whistle system had been disconnected. People checked, officially and unofficially. Teenagers broke in and dared each other to climb to the whistle room. There was nothing working up there, they said. Rust, bird nests, wires cut clean. Still, at 11 every night, the whistle sounded. Long, low. Mournful. It rolled over the town the way it had for generations, and every dog barked, and every old worker lying awake in bed went still. Adults pretended not to hear it. That is what adults do with things they cannot explain. They call them pipes, wind, vandals, memory. Children were told not to ask questions and not to go near the factory after dark. Of course, children do ask questions. We learned the stories in pieces. When the whistle blew, the night shift came. People who lived near the plant saw them. Figures walking through the dark toward the factory gates. Men with lunch pails. Women with scarves tied over their hair. They came from side streets, alleys, overgrown lots, all heading the same way with the steady tired walk of workers who have done the route 1,000 times. They did not speak. They did not hurry. They arrived at the gate, passed through it, and disappeared into the dead building. Some were dead. Some, the old people said, had not been dead the first time they went back. That was the part nobody liked to discuss. My uncle disappeared on a Thursday. I remember the day because it had rained hard in the afternoon, and the gutters overflowed. He had been in one of his quiet spells. My aunt said he ate dinner without really tasting it. At 10:30 she heard him moving around in the bedroom. When she went to check on him, he was wearing his old work shirt, the one with his name patch still sewn over the pocket. She told him to take it off. He said, "I heard them call me." She asked, "Who?" He said, "Shift's starting." At 11, the whistle blew. My aunt says she was in the bathroom when the back door opened. By the time she reached it, he was gone. No car. No coat from the peg, though it was cold. Just his lunch pail missing and the door swinging lightly in the rain. They searched all night. In the morning, they found his coat at the factory gate. Not the coat he would have worn outside. His old work coat, the heavy one from years before, the one my aunt had packed away in a trunk. It was hanging neatly on the fence, as if he had taken it off before clocking in. They never found him. After that, my aunt closed every window before 11. She kept the television loud. She said she did not want to hear the whistle. But sometimes, when I stayed with her, I would see her stand in the dark kitchen after it blew, looking toward the factory through the curtains with one hand pressed to her mouth. One night, when I was 13, she said, "He walks better now." I asked what she meant. She said that before he disappeared, his hip had bothered him. Years on concrete floors will do that. But the figure she saw heading to the factory after the whistle did not limp. Not anymore. He walked like he had when he was young and strong and proud to have work. I did not understand then whether that comforted her or broke her heart. Years passed. I left the town as soon as I could. Many of us did. I went to college, found work elsewhere, learned to sleep through the night without hearing an 11 o'clock whistle. I thought the factory would eventually be torn down. It never was. Too expensive, they said. Too much contamination. Too complicated. So it stayed, a rusting body at the edge of a town that had grown smaller around it. I went back for my aunt's funeral. By then, the town looked more abandoned than the factory. Storefronts empty. Houses for sale. The old diner closed. The school consolidated with the next district over. I stayed in my childhood bedroom for one night because there was nowhere else to go. At 10:55, I woke from a dead sleep. Not because of sound. Because of expectation. The room felt the way a room feels before a storm breaks. I lay there staring at the ceiling, telling myself to go back to sleep, to be a grown man, to ignore old stories. At 11, the factory whistle blew. It was louder than I remembered. It passed through the walls and my bones and every year between then and childhood. My heart began to pound. Across town, dogs barked. Somewhere a baby cried. I got out of bed and went to the window. The factory was visible from the second floor of our house, beyond rooftops and trees. Its windows were black squares against the darker sky. Rain misted the glass. At first I saw nothing. Then figures moved in the streets. Not many. A dozen, maybe more. They came from different directions, walking toward the plant. Some were faint. Some almost solid. Their heads were bowed against weather that did not touch them. One carried a metal lunch pail. Another wore a cap like my grandfather used to wear in photographs. A woman walked with a scarf over her hair and her hands tucked into the pockets of a work coat. Then I saw my uncle. I knew him instantly. Not by his face. He was too far away, and maybe faces are not what last. I knew him by his shoulders, by the way he carried weight in his back, by the rhythm of his stride. My aunt had been right. He did not limp. He walked strong and easy toward the factory gate, like a man going to a job he was glad to have. At the gate, a light came on. I had never seen light in the factory before. A small yellow bulb over the entrance, glowing through rain. One by one, the workers passed beneath it. As they did, each seemed to become clearer for a second, solid in the light, and then they were gone inside. My uncle paused. He turned his head. Not toward me exactly. Toward the town. Toward the houses where we had all watched him leave, fail, disappear, become a story. For a moment I thought he saw me in the window. Then he raised one hand. Not a wave. More like a worker's gesture at the end of a long day. A simple acknowledgement. I'm all right. Go on. Then he went inside. The whistle sounded again, shorter this time, and the light over the gate went out. I stayed awake until dawn. In the morning, I went to the factory. The gate was locked. The ground was mud. No fresh footprints. No light over the door. No sound from inside. I stood there with my hands in my pockets and felt nothing dramatic, no cold spot, no whisper, no presence. Just the sadness of a place that had taken everything people gave it and still somehow gave something back. I have never decided what the factory is. A prison, maybe. An old machine that keeps using the workers who loved or needed it too much. Or a mercy, as strange as that sounds. A place that gave men like my uncle what the world took from them. Routine. Purpose. A clock to obey. A door to walk through. A shift where their bodies were strong and useful again. Maybe that is the horror of it. Not that the dead keep working, but that some of them are grateful for the job. My aunt had kept my uncle's lunch pail. I found it while clearing the house after her funeral, tucked in the back of a closet, wrapped in an old towel. It was dented metal, blue once, mostly gray now, with his name scratched into the handle. I expected it to be empty. It was not. Inside was a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple, and a small thermos. The sandwich was fresh. Not warm, not magical in any dramatic way. Just fresh enough that the bread was still soft. The apple was red and unbruised. The thermos smelled faintly of coffee when I opened it, though no liquid came out. I set the lunch pail on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. Then I remembered something my aunt had told me years before, one of those details that had sounded like grief at the time. She said that after he vanished, some mornings she would come downstairs and find the pail by the back door. Not every day. Not even every week. Just sometimes. It would be there, clean and empty, as if he had brought it home after a shift. She would leave it alone, and by evening it would be gone again. She said she knew it was foolish, but on those mornings she felt calmer. As if some part of him still knew where home was, even if the factory kept most of him. I did not know what to do with the pail. Throwing it away felt cruel. Keeping it felt like accepting an obligation I did not understand. In the end, on the morning I left town, I drove to the factory gate and placed it outside the fence. It was early. Cold. The town was still asleep. I said quietly, "She kept this for you." Nothing answered. I walked back to the car. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the lunch pail was gone. That night, 200 miles away in a motel room, I woke at 11 to a sound so faint I might have dreamed it. A whistle. Very far off. Not calling me, I hope. Not yet. Just saying the pail had been received. Just saying the shift went on. There are people who will tell you work is only work, that factories are only buildings, that no job deserves a man's soul. They are right, of course. They are absolutely right. But there are places where generations poured so much of themselves into the floor that the floor learned their names. Places where the machines became calendars, where the whistle became prayer, where a life without the shift felt less like freedom than exile. Maybe the factory should be feared. Maybe it should be mourned. I do both. Breathe slow. The rain has you. Here is the next. The hospital that would not close. I explored abandoned buildings for almost 10 years. Urban exploration, urbex, whatever name you want to give it. I liked places people had forgotten. I liked the challenge of getting in without breaking anything, moving quietly, taking photographs, leaving no trace. I learned which floors could not be trusted, how to spot fresh graffiti, how to breathe through a mask when the air tasted of mold and asbestos. I knew the difference between a building that was dangerous and a building that was simply old. Abandoned hospitals were the places everyone wanted to see. They had everything. Long corridors. Operating rooms. Records left in cabinets. Wheelchairs rusting in corners. Beds with rails still raised. Peeling paint. Cracked tile. Sometimes a child's drawing taped to a wall. Sometimes a chapel. Sometimes the morgue. I had explored enough of them to think I understood their atmosphere. Hospitals hold fear, pain, relief, birth, death, waiting. When they are empty, all those things seem to settle into the plaster. But I did not think they were alive. I thought they were buildings. The state hospital changed that. It stood outside the city on a fenced property surrounded by overgrown trees. It had closed more than 30 years earlier after scandals, funding cuts, patient transfers, all the usual history. The main building was huge, 5 stories of dark brick with wings spreading out from the center like a body on a table. Every local explorer had tried to get in. Some had. The place was famous for being heavily watched for a while, then forgotten when the security contract ended. I went alone, which was stupid. I knew better. Everyone who does this seriously knows better. But my usual partner had cancelled, and the weather was perfect, rainy and cold enough to keep most people inside. I told myself I would only scout the exterior, maybe enter the administration wing, take a few shots, and leave. That was the plan. Then I saw the lit window. One window, on the 4th floor of the west wing, glowing warm yellow in the vast black face of the hospital. It stopped me at the fence. There should have been no power. No active generator. No construction. No security. Every other window was black or broken. But that one room shone as gently as a bedroom lamp. I stood in the rain and stared at it for a long time. A sensible person would have turned around. But people who explore abandoned hospitals alone at night are not sensible. We are curious first and afraid later, when it is too late to matter. I slipped through the gap in the fence, crossed the wet grass, and entered through a basement door someone had forced long before me. Inside, the hospital was as expected at first. Black corridors. Paint hanging in strips. Ceiling tiles collapsed. Old signs pointing toward wards and therapy rooms. My flashlight swept over a reception desk where leaves had blown in and gathered like paperwork. Rain dripped somewhere steadily. The building smelled of damp concrete, old dust, and something medicinal that should have faded decades before. I climbed the stairs toward the west wing. The higher I went, the more the hospital seemed to change. On the second floor, my flashlight caught a wheelchair positioned neatly against the wall, not rusted, not dusty. On the third, a row of doors stood closed, each with a small nameplate holder empty of names. The air grew warmer. Not much, but enough that I noticed. On the fourth floor, I stepped through a fire door and heard a machine beep. Just once. A soft electronic pulse, distant and familiar. I froze. After a few seconds, it beeped again. The sound came from the corridor ahead, the same direction as the lit room. My flashlight beam shook as I followed it. The hallway around me was ruined, but less ruined than below. The floor was cleaner. The doors more intact. My footsteps sounded wrong there, too loud, too modern. Then I saw light spilling from an open doorway. I turned off my flashlight. The lit room was ahead on the right. I approached slowly. The hallway outside it was bright at the edges, warm in the way hospital rooms are warm when someone is trying to make them less frightening. I could smell soap. Clean sheets. That sharp plastic scent of medical tubing. I reached the door and looked in. The room was not abandoned. It was clean. Perfectly clean. A single bed stood near the window, rails raised, white blanket tucked neatly. A chair sat beside it. A small table held a pitcher of water, a plastic cup, and a vase with flowers that were not fresh but had not quite died. A lamp glowed on the wall above the bed. The monitor beside it showed a slow green line, though no wires ran to any outlet I could see. In the bed lay an old woman. She was small, frail, propped on pillows, hands folded over the blanket. Her hair was thin and white. Her eyes were open, watching the doorway. Watching me. She smiled. It was the smile that nearly undid me. Not monstrous. Not knowing. Hopeful. "Are you my nurse?" she asked. Her voice was dry and soft. I could not answer. She turned her head slightly, as if trying to see whether someone stood behind me. "I've been waiting so long," she said. "The bell does not seem to work anymore." I looked at the wall by the bed. There was a call button there, old-fashioned, clipped to the sheet. Its cord ran nowhere. "They moved everyone," she said. "They said someone would come back. They told me to wait. I have been very good. I have waited." The air in the doorway seemed thick. Every instinct in me wanted to step in, to comfort her, to pour water into the plastic cup, to adjust the blanket. That was the terrible thing. She did not feel dangerous. She felt abandoned. The whole hospital around her felt abandoned with her. A vast dark building organized around one bright room and one patient who had not been discharged because no one had ever returned to say she could go. I said, "I'm not a nurse." Her face fell, but only for a second. Then she smiled again, smaller. "But you came," she said. "That counts." I should not have asked the next question. I asked, "How long have you been here?" She looked toward the window. Rain streaked the glass, and beyond it there was only black. "I do not know," she said. "The nights are longer now." The monitor beeped. Her eyes shifted to the chair beside the bed. "You can sit," she said. "Just until morning. They will tell you what to do when morning comes." Something in the chair changed when she said it. At first it was empty. Then it seemed to hold the idea of someone. A depression in the cushion. A faint outline of a person who had sat there many times before, leaning close, listening, waiting. I thought of every explorer who had followed the impossible light before me. Every curious person who found this room and heard the old woman ask if they were her nurse. Maybe some had said yes. Maybe the chair remembered their weight. I backed up. The old woman watched me with a sadness so plain and human that I hated myself for being afraid. "I'll find someone," I lied. "That is what they always say," she whispered. Behind me, down the corridor, a nurse's station light flickered on. I had passed it in the dark. Now it glowed at the far end of the hall. Papers lay on the counter. A phone rang once, then stopped. From another room came a cough. Then the squeak of rubber soles on tile. The hospital was waking. Not all at once. Slowly. The way a ward wakes at night when one patient calls and another stirs and the staff begin to move. The old woman's expression changed. Hope returned. "Are they coming?" she asked. I ran. Not immediately. There is shame in admitting that. For 2 seconds, I almost stayed. I almost stepped into the room and became what she needed. The pull was not force. It was obligation. Compassion. The unbearable weight of someone waiting too long. Then the hallway behind me filled with the soft sound of many call bells. I ran down 4 flights of stairs without caring about the holes in the steps. I crossed the lobby with my flashlight beam bouncing over old desks and ruined chairs. As I reached the basement door, an intercom crackled somewhere overhead. A woman's voice said, calm and professional, "Nurse to West Wing. Patient waiting." Outside, rain hit my face like waking up. I went through the fence and did not stop until I reached my car. Later, I searched the hospital records as best I could. There were many stories, many deaths, many patients transferred when the hospital closed. I never found her name. Maybe it was never in the articles. Maybe it had been lost in files that molded away in the basement. Maybe she was not one patient, but every patient ever left waiting in a bed when the system moved on. I do not explore hospitals anymore. I do not explore much of anything anymore. But sometimes, when I pass a hospital at night and see one window lit high in a dark wing, I think of her. The clean room. The useless call button. The chair waiting beside the bed. Her small hopeful voice asking if I had come to look after her. And I hope nobody ever finds that room again. Not because she means harm. Because she is so easy to pity. Because there are things in abandoned places that do not trap you with claws or teeth. They ask for help. They ask you to stay until morning. And if you are kind enough, or tired enough, or lonely enough, you sit down beside the bed. A year after I left the state hospital, I received an email from someone I did not know. The subject line was the name of the hospital. For a moment, I thought it was spam or some old forum message resurfacing. Then I opened it and found only a photograph attached. It showed a hallway. 4th floor, West Wing. I recognized it immediately. The cracked tile. The nurse's station at the far end. The doorway of the lit room, glowing softly on the right. In the doorway stood a person in scrubs. Their back was to the camera. They were leaning slightly into the room, one hand on the doorframe, as if listening to someone speak. The scrubs were modern. Blue. The person had a flashlight clipped to their belt. Below the image, there was one line of text. She says thank you for sending help. I deleted the email. Then I restored it from the trash and tried to trace the sender. The address no longer existed. I searched forums, missing persons reports, news articles. I never found anyone matching the figure in the photograph, but that means nothing. People vanish quietly all the time, especially people who go places alone and do not tell anyone exactly where. For weeks, I told myself the photograph was fake. Someone had heard my story, staged a picture, found the same room, messed with me. But I had never posted the story. Nobody knew. Years later, the hospital caught fire. Not a total loss, but enough that the city finally fenced it properly and declared demolition urgent. Photographers went afterward and posted hundreds of images online. I looked through them even though I told myself I would not. The fourth-floor west wing was burned black. Every room gutted. Every room except one. In one photograph, beyond collapsed ceiling tiles and scorched walls, a single room remained clean. The bed was made. The lamp was lit. A chair sat beside it, pulled close, as if someone had been sitting there for a long time. On the bed table were 2 cups of water. That was the detail that made me close the laptop. Not 1. 2. Maybe whoever stayed did help her. Maybe they are both still there, in that clean room in the dead hospital, waiting for morning, listening to the call bells in the hall. Maybe they are not suffering. Maybe the room is warm, and the old woman is no longer alone, and the chair is finally occupied by someone kind enough to sit down and mean it. That possibility should comfort me. It does not. Because kindness should not be a doorway that closes behind you. Almost there. Stay soft. Here is the next one. The last house on the street. There was a neighborhood near where I lived that emptied slowly. It had been an ordinary street once. Small post-war houses, chain-link fences, mailboxes, cracked driveways, little gardens, children riding bikes in the summer. Nothing special. The kind of place you pass without noticing until one day you hear it is going to be demolished for something larger and newer and more profitable. A developer bought the houses one by one. Some families were glad to sell. Some had wanted to leave for years. Others fought, then gave in when the offers rose and the city notices became impossible to ignore. Within 2 years, the street was vacant. Windows were boarded. Utilities were shut off. Lawns grew high. The plan was to clear everything and build apartments. Then the project stalled. Money, permits, lawsuits, contamination, nobody seemed to know. The result was an abandoned street left intact, a row of empty houses waiting for machines that never came. For months, then years, it sat there between life and demolition. Too dead to be a neighborhood. Too standing to be gone. I walked my dog past it in the evenings. At first I liked the quiet. It was a shortcut to the park, and the empty street felt peaceful in daylight. Birds nested in gutters. Weeds grew through driveways. The houses looked tired but not frightening. Just sad. At night, every house was dark. Except the last one. The last house on the left, at the end of the street before the road curved toward a stand of old trees, always had a light on upstairs. A warm light. Not the bluish glare of a work lamp or a flashlight. Not the harsh white of squatters with battery lanterns. A yellow bedroom light, steady behind curtains, glowing every evening as naturally as any occupied house. But the house had no power. None of them did. The whole street had been disconnected. I knew because a utility crew had removed the lines, and because people in the area complained about it constantly when the street lights went dark. Yet that upstairs room glowed every night. I told myself it was a reflection from somewhere else. Then I checked from different angles and saw it was not. I told myself a squatter had a generator. But I never heard one. Never saw a car. Never smelled smoke. No trash, no footprints, no sign of anyone entering or leaving. Just the light. For a while, I simply avoided looking at it. That is how we live with strange things. We do not investigate them. We adjust our route. We lower our eyes. We let the world keep its secrets as long as those secrets stay in their lane. Then one evening my dog stopped. He was an old dog, gentle, lazy, not prone to drama. We were passing the last house in the blue hour before full dark, when the light was already on upstairs. He stopped on the sidewalk and stared at the window. His ears came forward. His tail did not tuck, but it stopped moving. I followed his gaze. A woman stood in the lit window. She was framed by the curtains, looking down at us. An old woman, I thought. Small, thin, white hair pinned back. She wore a housecoat or robe, something pale with a pattern I could not make out. She looked perfectly ordinary, perfectly at home. She raised her hand. A neighborly wave. Before I could think, I waved back. My dog whined. The woman smiled. It was not a frightening smile. It was pleased. Warm. The smile of someone who has finally been acknowledged by a neighbor after too many evenings being ignored. I hurried on. That night, I dreamed about the house. In the dream, I stood on the porch while rain fell behind me. The front door was open. Inside, the hall was warm and smelled of furniture polish, old carpet, soup on a stove. Somewhere upstairs, the woman called down. "Come in, dear. The street is so empty now." The next day, I asked about the house at a local hardware store, where old men gathered around the counter pretending to buy nails. One of them knew the story. The last house had belonged to a woman named Mrs. Harlan. She had lived there since she was a young bride. Raised children there, buried a husband, watched the neighborhood change around her. When the developer came, she refused to sell. Everyone else left. She stayed. The city tried to force the issue. There were hearings, fines, letters, visits from lawyers. She became a minor local legend for a while, the old woman who would not move. Then she died. In the house. Alone, apparently, though one of the old men said not lonely. He said she had told everyone who would listen that the house was hers and she would stay in it until someone carried her out, and even then she would expect to be brought back. After she died, the developer finally got the property. Then the project stalled. The old lady won, the man at the counter said. "Street's still there, isn't it?" He laughed, but softly. I stopped walking that way for a week. Then curiosity pulled me back. This time I went without the dog. I told myself I was only going to look from the sidewalk. It was early evening, not yet dark. The street was empty. Every house sagged behind weeds and plywood. At the end, the last house waited with its upstairs light already glowing. I stood in front of it. The porch was weathered but not collapsed. The front garden, unlike the others, seemed less wild. Overgrown, yes, but with shape to it, as if someone had once loved it, and that love remained in the roots. A rusted mailbox leaned near the path. The name Harlan was still faintly visible on the side. The front door opened. Just a little. I did not see it open. I heard the latch, looked up, and found the door cracked inward, warm darkness beyond it. From upstairs came a floorboard creak. Then her voice. "Is that you, dear?" My body went cold. The voice was old, thin, and kind. Not a whisper. Not a theatrical ghost voice. Just an old woman calling from upstairs because she had heard someone at the door. I did not answer. "Come in if you're coming," she said. "Don't stand there letting the cold in." The smell reached me then. Not rot. Not dust. Warm house smell. Tea. Clean laundry. Lavender soap. Something baking, maybe, though no oven had worked there in years. I looked through the open doorway. For a second, the inside of the house was restored. The hall was papered with faded flowers. Family photographs lined the stairs. A lamp glowed on a small table. A pair of slippers waited near the bottom step. It was not fancy, not dramatic, just lived in and loved. Then the vision flickered. Under it, I saw the real hall. Peeling walls, dust, animal droppings, stains on the ceiling, a staircase with a broken banister, then warmth again, then ruin. The house was showing me both. What it had been, what it was, what she still believed it deserved to be. Streets gone quiet, Mrs. Harlan called. Nobody visits anymore. I stepped back from the porch. The upstairs curtain moved. She was in the window now, looking down. Her face was dim behind the glass, but I could feel her disappointment. "I'm sorry," I said. I do not know why I said it. Maybe to her. Maybe to the house. Maybe to all places that become valuable only when someone wants to erase them. The door closed softly. Not slammed. Closed. I did not go back after that. The development was officially abandoned the next year. The company dissolved. The properties were tied up in court, then forgotten. Some of the houses collapsed. Others were eventually demolished after storms damaged them. But the last house, for reasons nobody explained, remained standing. A friend who still lives nearby sent me a photograph last winter. The street is almost unrecognizable now. Trees growing through old lots. Foundations hidden in brush. The pavement cracked and green. At the very end, the last house still stands. Smaller than I remembered. More weathered. But upright. In the upstairs window, there is light. Warm yellow. Steady. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Then I deleted it. I do not know what Mrs. Harlan is. A ghost, maybe? A memory. A stubborn piece of a woman who loved her home so much that death was not enough to evict her. I only know that some abandoned houses are empty because everyone left. And some are empty because one person stayed so completely that nobody else could ever enter. The strange thing is that the last house became a kind of landmark. People who had lived in the neighborhood before it emptied began to visit the edge of the street on holidays. They did not go up to the door. Nobody did that. But they parked nearby, stood at the cracked curb, and looked toward the lit upstairs window. Some left flowers by the mailbox. Once, I saw a small wrapped gift on the porch steps, placed there carefully, as if by someone who knew the rules of a house they were no longer allowed to enter. Former neighbors spoke of Mrs. Harlan with complicated affection. They said she had been difficult, stubborn, nosy. The kind of old woman who knew when your trash cans went out late and whether your grass needed cutting. But they also said she had watched their children, fed stray cats, called ambulances when elderly men fell in driveways, kept spare keys for half the street. Every neighborhood has someone like that. A person who seems to belong not only to a house, but to the idea of the street itself. Maybe that was why the light stayed on. Not just because she refused to leave her own home, but because someone had to keep watch over what had been abandoned. Someone had to remember where the children learned to ride bikes, where the block parties happened, where marriages failed, where babies were brought home, where people waved from porches at dusk. When a neighborhood is cleared, the houses do not vanish all at once. First the people go, then the curtains, then the furniture, then the utilities. But the habits remain for a while. The route to the mailbox, the glance from one window to another, the knowledge of who lives where, even when nobody lives anywhere. Mrs. Harlan kept those habits. At least, that is what I tell myself. It is easier than imagining her alone in that upstairs room forever, listening to an empty street, and waiting for a knock that will never come. Easier to picture her as a guardian than a prisoner. Easier to believe she chose the light because every street, even a dead one, needs one window glowing so the dark cannot claim it completely. Still, I am glad I never went inside. Some invitations are not meant for strangers. Some homes defend themselves with warmth. 2 more. Let your breathing slow with the rain. Here is the next. The amusement park. The amusement park had been closed for nearly 25 years when we went there. It was not famous in the way some abandoned places become famous online. No dramatic disaster, no urban legends about mass deaths, no horror movie filmed there. It had simply failed. A family park built near a lake outside the city, popular for a while, then less popular, then too expensive to maintain. Insurance problems. Bankruptcy. Lawsuits. The usual dull reasons joy ends. By the time my friends and I found it, the forest had begun taking it back. We went in late autumn, after the leaves had fallen but before snow. There were 4 of us, all explorers, all careful enough to bring masks and gloves and stupid enough to climb a fence at midnight. The sky was clear. The moon was thin. The park lay beyond the fence in a tangle of weeds, rust, and memory. The ticket booths came first. Small windows with cracked glass. Faded signs listing prices that seemed impossibly cheap. A turnstile rusted halfway around, as if the last guest had pushed through and the mechanism had simply given up. Beyond them was the midway. Even dead, it was beautiful in a sad way. Game stalls lined the cracked pavement, their painted prizes long gone, their counters warped. A clown face with flaking paint grinned above a ball toss booth. The carousel stood under a sagging pavilion, its horses frozen mid-gallop, mouths open, eyes wide and bright in our flashlight beams. Farther back, the Ferris wheel rose against the sky, enormous and black, each bucket hanging still. Places built for happiness become strange when they are quiet. A hospital is supposed to hold suffering. A factory is supposed to hold labor. A school can feel stern even when full. But amusement parks are made for noise and light, for music, children screaming with delight, couples holding hands, sticky fingers, summer air. When they go silent, the silence feels like an injury. We took pictures for nearly an hour. Nothing happened at first. We joked. We scared each other. One friend climbed into a bumper car and posed with both hands on the wheel. Another found a stack of old ride tickets fused together by damp. The park was eerie, but ordinary. Then the Ferris wheel moved. At first, it was only a groan. Old metal shifting in the cold, we thought. Then the groan became a creak, then a long grinding turn. We all swung our flashlights toward it. The great wheel was rotating. Slowly. Impossibly. There was no power. No motor that could still function after decades of exposure. No wind strong enough to move that rusted structure. Yet it turned, one slow car after another rising against the night sky. We stood in the midway and watched. Then one of my friends whispered, "There are people on it." I did not want to see. But I did. The cars were occupied. Not all of them. Some swung empty. But others held riders, dark shapes at first, then clearer as the wheel carried them through the moonlight. A couple sitting close together. A child leaning over the bar. 2 teenagers with their hands raised as if the ride were fast. Their forms were pale and thin and flickering, but their joy was solid. Laughter drifted down. Soft at first. Then louder. The delighted screams of riders, the kind that rise when a Ferris wheel reaches the top and the whole park opens below. That sound moved through the dead midway and woke something. The carousel lights flickered. One by one, bulbs along the pavilion came on, weak and golden. The music started with a warped note, then another, then a full tinny melody, cracked but recognizable. The horses began to move. Up and down. Around and around. Riders appeared on them as the platform turned, children clutching poles, adults standing beside them, all smiling, all lit by old carnival bulbs. Then the midway lit. Not completely. Not brightly. But enough. Strings of bulbs buzzed to life over game stalls. Signs glowed. A popcorn machine behind a counter began to turn, though there was no popcorn inside. Somewhere, a bell rang and a recorded voice shouted, "Winner, winner, winner." The park was opening. Or remembering opening. Or had never truly closed. The air filled with smells. Cotton candy. Fried dough. Hot oil. Lake water in summer. Cigarette smoke from decades before smoking bans. I heard footsteps. Crowd noise. The rustle and surge of people passing around us, though whenever I turned directly, I saw only fragments. A sleeve. A face. A hand holding tickets. A little boy running toward the carousel. We should have run immediately. We did not. Because it was beautiful. I know how that sounds, but it was. The dead park became, for a few minutes, what it had been built to be. Not a ruin. Not a warning. A place of light and music under the night sky, full of people who sounded happy. One of my friends began to cry. She said later that she saw her father near the ring toss booth. He had taken her to that park when she was little. He had died years before our visit. She saw him the way she remembered him from childhood, young and smiling, holding 2 paper cones of cotton candy, looking around as if searching for her. She took 3 steps toward him before we grabbed her. That was when the park noticed us. The music did not stop. The laughter did not sour. Nothing lunged. Instead, the ticket booth behind us lit up. The windows slid open with a dry wooden scrape. Inside stood a man in a striped vest and paper hat, his face indistinct under the shadow of the booth. He held out 4 strips of tickets. "Plenty of time," he said. "Park's open late tonight." His voice was cheerful. Professional. The voice of someone who had said the same thing to thousands of families for thousands of summer evenings. My friend reached for the tickets. I slapped her hand down. The ticket man's smile remained. His arms stayed extended through the window. Behind him, on the wall of the booth, I saw old photographs. Guests entering the park. Families with strollers. Teenagers in groups. Couples holding hands. And among the faded pictures, much clearer than the rest, I saw faces I recognized from urbex forums. Explorers. People who had come here before. People whose accounts had gone quiet. In the newest photograph, a young man in a black hoodie stood beside the carousel, laughing, one hand raised to block the camera. His profile had posted about planning to visit this park 3 years earlier. Nobody had heard from him afterward. There had been comments, speculation, then nothing. In the photograph, he looked happy. So did everyone else. The ticket man gently shook the tickets, making them flutter. The Ferris wheel carried a car down near the platform. The gate opened by itself. Inside, 2 empty seats rocked slightly. "For the next ride," the ticket man said. We ran then. The park did not chase us. It invited. That was worse. As we ran down the midway, games lit up in front of us. Prizes appeared hanging from hooks, bright plush animals with glassy eyes. A vendor called, "Last chance for warm popcorn." Children laughed and ran beside us, not trying to stop us, only trying to keep up, urging us to come see, come ride, come play before the night ended. At the carousel, my friend pulled free for 1 second and turned back toward the man she thought was her father. He stood near the ring-toss booth, cotton candy in hand, smiling with such sadness that it nearly broke all of us. He mouthed something. She says it was stay. We dragged her through the gate in the fence. The moment we hit the weeds outside the park, the music thinned. The lights dimmed behind us. The Ferris wheel creaked once more, then stopped, a black circle against the stars. The laughter faded last. We got back to the car and drove without speaking. My friend never forgave us completely. She knew we had saved her, I think. But some part of her remained angry that we had pulled her away from her father's face, from the cotton candy, from the park as it had been when she was 8, and the world still had him in it. That is the cruelty of joyful hauntings. They do not look like traps. They look like the thing you miss most. The park burned a few years later. Teenagers, they said? Or lightning? Or insurance? The rides were destroyed, and the land was finally cleared. Apartments stand there now, built in rows with cheerful names like Lakeside View, though you cannot see the lake from most of them. People who live there complain about music at night. Not loud. Not every night. Just sometimes, after midnight, faint calliope music under the walls. Children laughing in the parking lot when no children are outside. The smell of cotton candy in the stairwells. And sometimes, from upper floor windows, residents report seeing a Ferris wheel turning in the dark reflection of the glass behind them. Not outside. Behind them. As if the park is not gone, only folded somewhere closer. As if all those rides are still running, full of everyone who accepted a ticket, throwing their endless joyful night for a crowd that never has to go home. The friend who saw her father eventually went back. She did not tell us beforehand. She went alone, during the day, after the fire but before the land was cleared. By then, most of the rides were blackened metal. The carousel pavilion had collapsed. The Ferris wheel stood half-burned, skeletal, its cars twisted and empty. She said the park felt dead then. Not sleeping. Not waiting. Dead. She walked to the ring-toss booth, the place where she had seen him, and found something in the ashes beneath the counter. A paper cone, the kind cotton candy comes in, only barely singed, though everything around it had burned. Her name was written on it in blue marker, the way vendors sometimes write orders when the park is crowded. Inside the cone was a strip of tickets. 1 ticket missing. She brought them to me because she did not want to keep them, and did not want to throw them away. We burned them in a metal bowl in my backyard. They were only paper, but they took a long time to catch. When they finally did, the smoke smelled sweet, like sugar melting on a hot machine. After that, she stopped dreaming of her father at the park. I do not know whether burning the tickets freed something or offended something or simply gave her mind permission to let go. But she became better. Quieter maybe, but better. The apartments built on the site have a small playground now. Bright plastic slide, 2 swings, rubber ground, safe and ordinary. Children play there in the afternoons. I saw it once from the road and thought, for a moment, that perhaps this is how places heal. Not by being emptied, not by being burned, but by being used again for something close to what they loved. Then I saw a little girl at the top of the slide looking past the parking lot toward an empty patch of grass. She was smiling at something I could not see. Her hand was raised as if she were holding a ticket. I drove on. I did not look in the mirror. Last one now. Let this be the one you fall asleep to. The building that remembers its people. I will end with the one that changed how I think about abandoned places. Before it happened, I had a simple theory. I thought buildings were containers. People lived in them, worked in them, suffered in them, celebrated in them, then left. The container remained. The feeling we got inside abandoned buildings was just imagination, atmosphere, decay, our brains reacting to silence and darkness and signs of interrupted life. I still believe some of that. But not all. The building that taught me otherwise was an old apartment house near the river. It had been grand once, 6 stories, brick and stone, with a lobby that still had marble under the grime and a staircase with iron railings shaped like vines. It had been empty for years after a fire in one wing and a long legal fight over repairs. I found it through an old forum post and went alone on a rainy night, which seems to be how every bad story begins. I expected the usual. Peeling paint. Rot. Graffiti. Empty rooms with mattresses and beer cans and old mail. I got all of that at first. The lobby smelled of wet plaster. My flashlight caught a broken chandelier lying on the floor like a dead insect. Mailboxes stood open along one wall, their little doors bent. Then I stepped into the first apartment. And felt a family. Not saw. Felt. Warmth, noise, motion. A kitchen crowded with bodies, though the room was empty. A woman stirring something on a stove. Children arguing at a table. A man coming in tired and hanging keys by the door. It struck me all at once, not as a vision exactly, but as knowledge so immediate it felt like memory. This room had held a family that was always late, always loud, always cooking too much food. I smelled garlic and soap. I heard laughter behind my ears. The empty wall seemed full to bursting. I backed into the hall, shaken. The feeling vanished. The apartment was dark and ruined again. I told myself it was imagination. Then I entered the apartment across the hall. There, the feeling was entirely different. Quiet. Careful. One person. Elderly, maybe. Curtains always drawn halfway. A chair near the window. Tea cooling on a side table. The loneliness in that apartment was so complete that tears came to my eyes before I knew why. It was not frightening. It was intimate. I felt the shape of days spent listening for footsteps that rarely came. Room after room did this. Each apartment held its people. A couple who fought so often the walls seemed to tighten around me. A young man practicing guitar badly and happily. A mother walking a crying baby through the dark at 3 in the morning. Students crowded into 2 rooms, laughing, broke, immortal for a little while. A man dying slowly in the back bedroom while his wife slept in a chair beside him. A child hiding under a table during an argument. A birthday party. A betrayal. A proposal. A winter flu. A Christmas morning. A night someone packed a suitcase and left before dawn. The building remembered all of it. Not as ghosts walking around in sheets, not as scenes projected for my benefit, but as impressions pressed into space. Lives had soaked into the walls. Years of breath, heat, grief, joy, fear, boredom, routine. Every ordinary moment that people think disappears had not disappeared. It had accumulated. By the 3rd floor, I understood that abandoned buildings are not empty. They are overcrowded. Every room holds everyone it has ever held. Not in a way that can always speak or move or knock, but in pressure, in shape, in emotional weather. We leave our lives behind in places more deeply than we know. On the 5th floor, I found the burned wing. The fire had started there, according to articles I read later. A winter electrical fire in the night. Most residents escaped. Some did not. The hallway was blackened. The air tasted bitter even years later. My flashlight beam turned grainy in the soot. I almost turned back, not because of structural danger, though there was plenty, but because the feeling there was heavier than anything below. The first burned apartment held panic. Pure panic. Heat, smoke, hands on a door too hot to open, someone coughing, someone praying, someone trying to remember where they had left their phone. I stumbled out choking, though the air was clear enough through my mask. The next apartment held absence. That is the only word. Absence so deep it felt like a hole in the building. A room where someone had been, then suddenly was not, and the walls had never recovered from the shock of losing them. At the end of the hall was an apartment with the door still intact. It was closed. Unlike every other door I had seen, this one had no graffiti, no pry marks, no fire damage. A brass number hung at eye level. 512. I do not know why I opened it. Inside, the apartment was untouched. Not clean. Dust lay on everything. But whole. Furniture in place. Curtains drawn. A bookshelf. A rug. Photographs on the wall. The room felt occupied in a way that made me whisper an apology before stepping inside. This apartment did not show me one life. It showed me many. At first I thought it belonged to a single person, perhaps an old woman, because I felt the quiet rhythms of long residence. Then other layers appeared. A young couple painting the walls. A child learning to walk between the couch and chair. A teenager slamming a bedroom door. A widower eating soup alone. A nurse coming home after night shift and sitting in the dark because she was too tired to turn on a lamp. Decades stacked together, all in the same rooms, not replacing one another but existing at once. The building had kept them all. In the living room, on a small table, sat a guest book. That made no sense. It was the kind of book you see at weddings or funerals, with a cloth cover and lined pages. Dust covered it, but when I opened it, the pages were full of names. Not signatures from visitors. Residents. Names, apartment numbers, dates. Some written in old ink, some in pencil, some in ballpoint pen. I found names from articles, from old mailboxes, from scraps of letters scattered through the building. Everyone who had lived there seemed to be recorded in the book, though no landlord would have kept such a thing there. Near the end was a blank line. My name was written beneath it. Not in my handwriting. Not fully. Just my first name, as if the building was not sure yet whether I would belong enough to receive the rest. I closed the book very slowly. Behind me, the apartment door clicked shut. I turned. The room was no longer dark. Not bright. Just gently lit by lamps that had not worked in years. The furniture looked newer. Rain tapped against the window. From beyond the door came hallway sounds, footsteps, voices, someone laughing downstairs, a baby crying faintly. The apartment house was full. Alive. Breathing around me. And I understood what it wanted. Not to kill me. Not to scare me. To remember me. That was all. The building remembered its people because that was what it did. It held them. It held every life that passed through it, every argument, meal, illness, party, loneliness, kiss, ending. It did not want to be abandoned because abandonment, to a remembering thing, must feel like starvation. No new footsteps. No new voices. No new memories. Only old ones turning in the dark. I sat on the dusty couch. I did not mean to. My legs simply gave up, and for a while I let the building hold me too. Around me, all its remembered lives moved softly. I felt them not as separate ghosts but as a crowd of warmth and sorrow. The family downstairs cooking. The lonely person by the window. The couple fighting and making up. The child growing. The old man dying. The nurse coming home tired. All of them still there because the walls loved them enough to keep the shape of them. I cried. Quietly, stupidly, in an abandoned apartment with my flashlight in my lap. Because it was beautiful. And because it was unbearable. After a while I stood. The room dimmed. The sounds faded. The building did not stop me. It did not lock the door or whisper my name or send footsteps after me. It only seemed to wait, patient and sad, as I opened the apartment door. In the hallway, the air was cold again. I left the guest book closed. On my way down, every room felt quieter, as if the lives inside had turned to watch me go. In the lobby, I paused by the mailboxes. One of them, which had been empty when I entered, now held a small envelope. My first name was written on it. I did not open it. I left it there. Outside, the rain had softened to mist. I stood on the sidewalk and looked back at the building. For a moment, every window seemed full of warm light. Silhouettes moved behind curtains. A woman looked down from the 5th floor and raised a hand. Then the building was dark again. I never explored another abandoned place after that. Not because I was too afraid. Because I understood. To walk through those rooms was not to trespass in empty space. It was to walk through the stored lives of people who had trusted those walls with their most ordinary, most private days. Their breakfast dishes. Their grief. Their bad sleep. Their birthdays. Their last breaths. It felt, after that night, too intimate. Too much like opening someone else's memory without permission. But the building gave me one comfort I have kept. Nothing is ever really empty. The places we live keep some part of us. Not perfectly. Not enough to replace us. But enough. A laugh in the kitchen. A hand on a doorframe. A night spent crying into a pillow. A morning when light came through the curtains and, for no particular reason, we felt briefly happy to be alive. The rooms hold these things. The walls listen. The floorboards learn our weight. And long after we leave, something remains. Maybe that is frightening. Maybe it is kind. Maybe every home is a little haunted, not by horror, but by love and routine and the marks of being lived in. Maybe that is why old houses feel full even when empty. Maybe that is why we lower our voices in abandoned rooms. Some part of us knows we are not alone there. We are surrounded by everyone the place has ever kept. So sleep well, my friend. Your home is warm tonight. Your room knows you. The walls around you have learned the sound of your breathing, the rhythm of your days, the shape of your quiet hours. They are not watching in any cruel way. They are keeping, holding, remembering. And someday, long from now, when you have moved on, when another person stands in a room you once loved and feels suddenly, inexplicably, comforted, perhaps that will be you. Not trapped. Not lost. Simply remembered kindly. I never open the envelope from the mailbox, but I think about it more often than I should. Sometimes I imagine it contained a lease. Sometimes a thank you note. Sometimes a blank page where my name would have appeared if I had carried it home. Most often, I imagine it contained a photograph of me sitting on that dusty couch, crying with my flashlight in my lap, already added to the building's memory. Maybe leaving it unopened was the only wise thing I did. The building was demolished 5 years later. I saw the announcement online and felt a grief that surprised me. I had known it only for one night, yet I mourned it like a person. I wondered what happens when a remembering building is torn down. Do the memories scatter with the dust? Do they cling to bricks taken away in trucks? Do they settle into the land beneath, waiting for new foundations? Or does the act of demolition finally release everyone the walls have held? A new building stands there now. Condos, of course. Clean glass balconies, secure lobby, a gym on the first floor. People live there. They make coffee, argue, laugh, drop keys in bowls, fall in love, grow lonely, wake from bad dreams, stand at windows during rain. The place has begun its own work of remembering. I hope the old building is kind to them. I know how that sounds. The old building is gone. But places are more than structures. They are habits in the land. Repeated human presence leaves channels, like water. A new wall rises where an old wall stood, and perhaps it hears what the old one heard. Perhaps the ground under a home is never blank. When I moved into my current apartment, I stood in each empty room before unpacking and introduced myself. I felt foolish. Still, I did it. I told the rooms my name. I told them I would try to be gentle with them. I told them they did not have to keep anything painful if they did not want to. Then I opened the windows and let the air move through. Maybe that is superstition. Or maybe it is manners. Either way, the apartment has been good to me. On difficult nights, it settles around me like an old friend. The floor creaks in the hall. The refrigerator hums. Rain touches the glass. And I feel, not watched, but held. That is the best ending I can give an abandoned place. Not that it frightens us. That it teaches us how not to abandon each other. That is all the tapes for tonight, and that is the 12th tape we have shared, you and I. If you drifted off somewhere in the dark, then rest easy. I am still here. The rain is still falling. And if you are still awake to hear this, thank you. Thank you for spending these nights with me, for letting me keep the dark company while you slept. It has meant everything. The stories are done now. There is nothing left but the storm and the room and the soft hush of the night. The dark is just the dark. Your home is full and warm and lived in, and its walls remember you kindly. You are safe. The door is locked. The windows are closed. There are no abandoned halls to walk tonight, no dark factories calling shift, no lit windows in dead hospitals, no empty desks waiting in rooms that should have stayed closed. Only rain. Only rest. Let your shoulders go heavy. Let your jaw unclench. Let your breathing slow. The places in these stories are far away now. The mall is locked. The ghost town is out in the desert. The school bell is quiet. The factory whistle has blown itself back into memory. The hospital room is still lit, but it is not your room. The last house keeps its own window glowing. The amusement park plays its music for someone else. And the building that remembers its people has closed its guest book for the night. You do not have to answer any invitation. You do not have to go inside. You can stay right here, warm and safe, while the rain does what rain has always done. It covers the roads, softens the roofs, taps against the glass, and makes the world outside gentle enough to leave alone. And if any of these stories stay with you, let it be the last one most of all. Not the fear of the places. Not the lit window, or the whistle, or the classroom door. Let it be the thought that places hold what happens inside them, and that this can be a gentle thing when the life inside is gentle. Your room tonight is not abandoned. It is not hungry. It does not need you to fill a vacancy. It has your warmth already. Your clothes on the chair, perhaps. A cup on a table. The small ordinary evidence that you are here, alive, present, and allowed to rest. The abandoned places can keep their invitations. You do not need the mall after closing. You do not need the desert town that knows your name. You do not need the old school to mark you present, or the factory to give you a shift, or the hospital to ask you to sit down beside a bed. You do not need the house with the upstairs light, or the park with its tickets, or the apartment building with its guest book. You have your own place tonight. And even if the room around you is simple, even if it is rented, temporary, cluttered, too small, too quiet, too ordinary, it is still doing the ancient work of shelter. It is holding the weather outside and your breathing inside. It is keeping the dark at a kind distance. It is allowing you to be unguarded for a while. That is no small thing. So let the rain make the abandoned places blur and fade. Let the mall lights go out. Let the ghost town settle back into desert. Let the school close its classroom door. Let the factory workers clock in far away, if they must. Let the hospital lamp burn for someone else. Let Mrs. Harlan keep her window. Let the Ferris wheel turn in whatever night still holds it. Let the remembering building close its arms around all the lives it kept. You are here. Not there. Here, where the blanket is warm, where the floor knows your weight, where the locked door means safety and not exclusion. Here, where you can sleep. One more breath before the end. Notice how far away every dangerous threshold is now. The broken fence, the service corridor, the classroom door with the little pane of glass, the factory gate under the rain, the hospital room with the clean white bed, the porch of the last house, the ticket booth, the mailbox with your name on an envelope. They are all far away, separated from you by roads, years, locked doors, and the simple fact that you are not walking toward them. The stories may open doors in the imagination, but imagination can close them too. So close them gently. Close the mall gate. Close the ledger in the ghost town store. Close the classroom notebook. Close the factory lunch pail. Close the hospital curtain. Close the old woman's front door. Close the amusement park ticket window. Close the guest book in the remembering building. And maybe, somewhere very far from here, an abandoned place is listening to its own rain. Maybe water is falling through a hole in a roof, tapping into a bucket no one placed there. Maybe a sign swings over a locked shop. Maybe an old stair creaks because wood remembers weight even when no foot is on it. Let those places have their night. Let them keep their memories. They have carried enough. You do not have to carry them. A story can be placed down, gently, the way you would set a candle on a table and leave it burning in another room. It can glow there without needing your attention. It can fade by itself. Your only work now is to rest. No footsteps. No knocking. No call from another room. Only the small, steady permission to let go for a while, to be unreachable by every abandoned thing, and to sink, slowly and safely, into sleep. There. All closed. The rain remains. The room remains. And you remain, safe and warm and breathing slowly, with nothing left to answer. There are more tapes waiting, always. But for now, rest. If sleep is already near, let it come in quietly. It does not have to announce itself. It can arrive the way evening arrives in an empty hallway, not suddenly, but by soft degrees. First the edges of the room loosen. Then the rain becomes less like separate drops and more like one continuous hush. Then the stories stop being scenes and become only shapes, distant and harmless, like buildings seen from a train at night. You do not need to hold the endings. You do not need to solve what the places were, or what they wanted, or why some doors open after everyone has gone. Let the questions stay outside with the wet pavement and the dark windows. Questions can wait until morning. Everything can wait until morning. For now, let the body be simple. Let the bed be enough. Let the breath come and go without being watched too closely. The world asks so much during the day. At night, for a little while, it can ask nothing. You can belong only to rest. If one last image remains, make it a quiet one. Not a face in a window, not a figure in a hall. Make it an ordinary room after rain, with the air clean and the curtains still, with morning waiting patiently somewhere beyond the dark. Make it the kind of room where nothing needs to happen, where no story is asking to begin. That is where you are going now. Not into the abandoned places, but away from them. Away from old lights and old doors and old voices. Back into the simple dark behind closed eyes, where the rain becomes softer and softer, until even the rain is only a thought, and then not even that. Sleep well. The tape can end now. The room can stay. You can sleep, and nothing outside the story can follow you here tonight. And I will see you again, next time, after midnight. Sleep safe tonight, friend.